The French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, has banned members of his cabinet from holidaying abroad. Now, this follows revelations that his prime minister and foreign minister went on free vacations in crisis-hit North African countries. Rory Challens reports.
Prime Minister François Fillon would probably like to escape France at the moment. So too would Foreign Minister Michel Alliot-Marie. The problem is that's exactly what's got them both into trouble. Monsieur Fillon took his family on holiday to the Nile resort of Aswan, courtesy of Egypt's unpopular president Hosni Mubarak. And Madame Alliot-Marie is facing calls to resign for flying on a private plane to Tunisia for holidays. That plane owned by a businessman with alleged ties to ousted leader Ben Ali. With pictures like these coming daily from the Middle East, it was very bad timing for the politicians. The French media has had a field day, painting the two as cozying up to despots and autocrats.
How comes that the French foreign minister and the French prime minister were going to these countries at this very moment when, in the case of Tunisia, the repression and the revolt had already started, and at the time when one could imagine that the French diplomacy was aware that there was a risk of contagion.
But the Prime Minister insists he's done nothing wrong.
I have strictly respected all the rules related to private trips abroad for the Prime Minister, as well as the President of the Republic.
But even if no rules were broken, President Sarkozy knows this looks bad, and new guidelines have been issued.
For the
holidays, from now on, members of the government will have to prioritize France. Invitations abroad will be authorized by the Prime Minister, in agreement with the diplomatic sections of the French presidency.
Some, though, might question the wisdom of putting the Prime Minister, one of the culprits here, in charge of preventing any further embarrassments. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera.
In Jordan, the King Abdullah, has sworn in a new government. Well, the reshuffle was prompted by protests calling for change in the country. They were inspired by the demonstrations in Egypt and Tunisia. The ex-army chief, General Maruf Baghit, becomes prime minister, and he's been tasked with implementing new legislation.
We are giving priority to political reform, probably to legislations that govern political life. Therefore, the government will immediately start with a national dialogue, without excluding anyone, and will come up with a new election law that has general consensus, as well as other legislations such as municipalities and public gathering laws. The government will take effective measures to fight corruption.
Former Liberian President Charles Taylor has boycotted his war crimes trial at The Hague for the second day running. The proceedings have now been adjourned while the judges decide whether to allow an appeal by Taylor's legal team. His lawyers are angry that a defense document has been ruled inadmissible. Taylor denies 11 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity during the Sierra Leone civil war in the 1990s.
You know what this is about, their denial of our final brief? It's about simply this. You're not running this court, Mr. Taylor. We are. And we're going to show you who's in charge by rejecting your final brief. So this is about ego, not justice. And I really don't see that this kind of personalized politics has any part to play in a court of law.
A month after she was shot in the head at point-blank range, a U.S. congresswoman is beginning to regain her speech. Let's go to Rosalind Jordan in our Washington Broadcast Center for more on that. Rosalind.
Thanks so much, Darine. Gabrielle Giffords' doctors say that she's now speaking, quote, more and more. The Congresswoman was alert on Monday morning, even requesting a change to her breakfast. Giffords is recovering at a rehabilitation center in Texas after she was shot during a mass killing in Tucson, Arizona in early January. A U.S. judge has rejected a defense motion to delay the testimony of 2 Cuban officials in the perjury trial of an ex-CIA agent. A Cuban Interior Ministry investigator has been testifying in the trial of 82-year-old Luis Posada Carriles. The judge has let him testify about a 1997 Havana hotel bombing that prosecutors say Posada planned. Prosecutors also accuse the Cuban-born Posada of lying, both about how he came to the U.S. in 2005 and about his role in the Havana attacks. Meantime, Cuban Americans are assessing the potential impact of a new White House policy on relations with their homeland. The Obama administration has eased travel restrictions as well as increased the amount of money which Americans can send to their relatives in Cuba. But not everyone welcomes these changes, as we hear from Kimberly Halkett in Miami.
Okay, it's coming up.
For Domingo Amarshastegui, preparing Cuban coffee is a daily ritual. But he says it's bittersweet, much like his memories of living in Cuba under the United States economic embargo. The U.S. put commercial limits on Cuba when Domingo was just a young man to push it towards democracy. After 50 years of waiting, Domingo says President Obama's recent relaxing of some restrictions is just a rehashing of a Clinton White House policy.
Expectations were higher. And the fact that they are not coming up with fresh ideas, fresh initiatives, something that will go beyond what we have already experienced one way or another.
Admittedly, this easing of restrictions is not a dramatic shift in White House policy towards Cuba. So you can understand why older generation Cuban Americans, like the ones gathered here in Little Havana in Florida, say they're somewhat skeptical. They say they've seen it all before. But when it comes to the younger generation, they're more optimistic.
Felice Gorordo heads up a Cuban student movement called Roots of Hope. He says the communist government has just issued 75,000 self-employment licenses to offset massive state layoffs and encourage entrepreneurs.
It's significant because for the first time there is some sort of a movement and some sort of change going on the island. And it's important for us to reach out to our counterparts now more than ever before.
Gorordo wants to inspire young Cubans to think beyond the U.S. embargo and provide tools for Cuban workers to succeed. His latest project, collecting used cell phones, a luxury few can afford.
And this is significant for Cuba because up until 2008, cell phones were illegal.
But many of the older Cubans are tired of what they call political game playing with their beloved island nation. What they want isn't a reworking of an old U.S. policy, but instead an entirely new one for Cuba teetering on the fringes of change. Kimberly Halkett, Al Jazeera, Miami.
And that's all the news now here in Washington. Doreen, back to you.
Rosalind, thank you. Well, Thailand and Cambodia will present their arguments over a border dispute at the United Nations next week. Both countries blame each other for damage to an ancient Hindu temple that's located at the center of recent military clashes. At least 11 people have died in the fighting and thousands have fled their homes. At least 4 Russian sailors have died and 7 are still missing after their cargo ship sank off the South Korean coast. Coast guards say the Cambodian registered carrier collided with an unidentified vessel. The ship was en route from Russia to Japan. South Korean rescue teams are continuing to search for the remaining crew. Talks between the North and South Korean military have broken down. Neither side could agree on the agenda for future discussions. Tensions have been high on the peninsula since the North shelled a South Korean island in November, killing 4 people at the time. Hundreds of opposition supporters have taken to the streets of Sri Lanka to protest against the rising food prices. Organized by the United National Party, the demonstration also called for the release of the former army general, Sarath Fonseca. Mine Fernandez has the latest from Colombo.
Hundreds of people have turned up for this protest demonstration organized by the main opposition United National Party in Colombo. The opposition is protesting the leadership of current President Mahinda Rajapaksa, as well as urging for the release of former army commander Sarath Fonseca. As you can see behind me, a number of people dressed as prison inmates urging this release of the former army chief. Another reason that people have come out today is to protest against media suppression. What they say is murders and abductions in the north, the escalating price of living. As you can see, we've got goods which are displayed here, vegetables and commodities which have really shot up in price. Mine Fernandez, Al Jazeera, Colombo.
Security is tight in Indonesia ahead of the latest trial of the Muslim cleric Abu Bakr Bashir. 1,200 police have been deployed near the courthouse in South Jakarta. Bashir's supporters are expected to hold a rally outside. It's the cleric's third trial on terrorism-related charges in a decade. Steph Vassen reports.
He is known for his fiery speeches and endless campaign for an Indonesian Islamic State. 72-year-old Abu Bakar Bashir has never been convicted of direct involvement in terrorist attacks, despite 2 previous trials and jail terms. Prosecutors now say they have enough evidence showing Bashir has funded a terrorist training camp in Aceh and helped to buy weapons used to commit acts of terror. Footage has emerged of the camp in Aceh, where armed fighters can be seen undergoing military training. In a statement, they call themselves Al-Qaeda Indonesia. More than 130 members of the group were arrested after police raided the camp in 2010. Those who escaped were allegedly involved in bank robberies and an attack on a police station that killed several policemen. Prosecutors say they now have evidence the group was planning Mumbai-style attacks, allegedly targeting embassies, hotels and the presidential palace. Bashir is the founder of an Islamic boarding school in central Java that has educated several people convicted for terrorism in the past. The cleric has a small but dedicated group of followers. He spent 2 years in prison in connection with the Bali attacks in 2002, but was never proven to be the leader of Jemaah Islamiyah, the network held responsible for the bombings. In 2004 he was jailed again, but got an early release in 2006. Abu Bakar Bashir has kept silent so far, but he did write a letter obtained by Al Jazeera in which he uses several verses from the Quran to endorse the armed training camp in Aceh. But if this letter and the testimony of 134 witnesses will be enough to jail him for terrorism is still a serious challenge for the prosecution. Steph Vassen, Al Jazeera, Jakarta.
Still ahead this hour, Louise will have all the sport, including La Liga's top goal scorers take their rivalry to an international level. Stay with us for all the details on that clash. And getting his feet wet, how one of the world's top golfers is aiming to slip slide back to victory in Dubai. That's coming up.